was proud to present Dr. Rohit Jindal.
Hello, my name is Rohit Jindal. I work at McEwen University and Canada, and I'm happy to present on Nhambita Community Carbon Project in Mozambique. And my presentation will focus on measuring local impact of carbon payments, which I think is part of the sustainable development component of RED. And some of the main questions that I tackled in this research, and I would like to present are local impact of RED. Then we want to know whether the poor people in the community are able to participate in the project. What is the impact on participants? And what is the impact on non participants? Is the project creating any perverse impact on non participants? And then um, questions about leakage and permanence, which I think are very important in context of RED. So these are the questions that I had when I started this research. And some of the challenges that we faced in doing this research was that obviously in these kind of research, in these kind of projects, RED projects, the selection of participants is non-random. So when we go and do an impact study later on, we have to deal with that. Then the other thing is that many of these projects not only have a project component where people are being paid to conserve forests, but they are also being employed. Some of them are also being employed in different project activities. So we needed to find the differentiate between the project impact versus the development impact or the impact of the project. And there are spillover effects of these kind of projects because these are being implemented in very remote communities where maybe there are some other development activities, or in general, whenever projects are implemented over a long period of time, we need to find out what's the spillover in neighboring areas. So these were the challenges, and the way we dealt with this was through a statistical technique of difference in difference, where I calculated the change for participants and subtracted the change for non-participants, assuming that all the macro changes would have had the same impact on everybody. Okay, so this project, the Nambita Community Carbon Project, is located in Mozambique, in the Gorongosa National Park, which was severely affected by the civil war, and so since the end of civil war, and the project started in 2003, it's been trying to conserve the local forest. There are four main components of the project. One is the carbon and RED payments. In carbon payments, local community members, receive payments for 7 years for taking up agroforestry adoption on their farms. They get paid about $4.50 per ton of carbon, that's carbon dioxide that sequestered on their farms, and total payment works out to $400 to $800 per hectare, depending on what kind of agroforestry practice they take up. For example, it could be setting up boundary plantations or intercropping, depending on what they would like to do. Then the second component is RED payments, where the local community is conserving uh, 11,000 hectare forest area, and the payment for this is given sent to the community fund. Now, the project also had a development component where the project created some kind of micro enterprises in the area, leading to a carpentry shop, tree nurseries, and some of the people who were employed in this were receiving a salary of $50 to $100 per month. Apart from that, for project administration, because the project is actually based in the area, they also hired some admin staff, and for these the salary was much higher, from $100 to $600 per month. So this project started in 2003, and I did an impact evaluation in 2008 when the first component was concluded. All the project is still ongoing, but my study kind of looks at 5 years of implementation and looks at what kind of impact can be created within the first 5 to 6 years of a PES, of a RED project, in terms of the local impact. Okay, so the field survey data were collected through what I call as a stratified random sampling technique, where we looked at households that had both jobs in the project as well as carbon contracts. Then we selected households that had only carbon contracts, and then non-participating households that were not participating in the project at all. Apart from that, we also went to neighboring villages which were not participating in the project at all. So there were four levels of sampling. Um, People who had a job and contracts, only carbon contracts, non-participating households, and non-participating villages. Then the data was collected for 2008 after the first phase had been implemented, and we also collected recall before project data for 2001. Some main results were, when we looked at the difference between before project and after project, the main results were question one was we were interested in understanding whether the poor people are able to participate or not. As this graph shows, the percentage distribution of households, poor households, is much higher in terms of participation in the project than people who are better off. So through this analysis, we were able to show that the poor people were able to participate in the project. The activities were being implemented in a way that they were able to access them. And in terms of the impact on incomes and wealth level, some of the this slide shows the main statistical analysis that was carried out, and there were various variables that we looked at. Have the literacy levels gone up within the household? Are there households with no literates? Number of farms, have they increased? Livestock. Then their annual expenditure on food, access to wage labor in the village. Then people with at least one permanent job or a small business, households' annual cash income, and asset ownership. So these were the various criteria on which we measured the impact of the project on participating households versus non-participating households. And rather than spending time on each of them, I would like to show you my main results, and then we can come back to this slide if there are any questions or comments. Our main results were that in terms of livelihood impact, we found that carbon payments were being used by local households for improving their roofing. Remember, this is a remote community with very far away from the road, with very few infrastructure. So these carbon payments were helping people to buy roofing material for their houses, buy food in times of shortage, buy seeds, books, and clothes for their children. We also found that the payments were able to increase income for households. So household income also increased, but we found that the income and asset level increased much more for people with jobs than people who had only carbon contracts. So carbon contracts were useful. So red payments and carbon payments were useful for people, but the real poverty alleviation happened for households that were being employed in the project. In terms of the spillover benefits, we found that the community fund that had been created through RED had almost $3,000, and that was quite big, and had funded school buildings, a primary health clinic in the area. It also led to creation of opening up of small shops, and these are very remote villages. Some of them are about 30 kilometers from any nearest road. So having small shops was very useful for people in the area. However, we did not find any significant impact on literacy levels from the project. Now, in terms of the environmental impacts, within the first 4 or 5 years of the project implementation, it had been able to sequester more than 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide. But there were some serious concerns regarding leakage, mainly due to slash and burn practices when farmers are setting up new farms. Also, because of migration, as Mozambique ended civil strife, more and more people were coming back from urban areas, back to rural areas, and setting up new farms or shambas. And so this also led to leakage. But we found that due to ethical concerns, having strict control over leakage would be very difficult in these kind of situations. In terms of permanence, the way the contracts were set up was that farmers would get paid for the first 7 years, but they would have to protect trees for 100 years. And there are concerns on whether the next generation would be interested in following that contract or not. The project also had a 15% risk buffer, so the total value of the contract out of that 15% was kept aside as a risk buffer, but we still do not know if that would be enough. So, in terms of concluding this study, what we found was that we have to come up with we have to have realistic estimates when we are looking at the local impacts of RED projects in terms of sustainable development. These projects will not probably create an overnight poverty alleviation. For instance, in this case, we found that the impact of jobs is much more than the carbon payments. In terms of leakage and permanence, excuse me, we found that it's very difficult to address these in small projects because these are almost like islands of conservation in big, broad areas. Another concern is about how high value long term contracts. So, this project went in for high value long term contracts where farmers could get more money per contract. But because they have to protect and conserve trees for a long period of time, there are threats to permanence of carbon contracts. Shorter contracts, shorter duration contracts, contracts which are only a 5 year duration or 10-year duration, would probably lead to more permanence. But then they will produce very small payments, which may not be enough for the farmers or for the local households. So this trade-off will depend on the local context, depending on where a project is being implemented and what is the main kind of overarching goal. So this is what we found in terms of this research study. It has also been published by the World Development in case people would like to know more. And my contact details are here in case people want to know more about the project or the study. Thank you.